Okay, so this is, as you know, the orientation for the Critical Thinking ILO assessment. First of all, thank you so much for agreeing to participate in this assessment. So we're going to flip to the next slide, which gives an assessment overview. Whoops, there's something missing there, but basically what you see, this is a general, there's a
I saw it.
missing
That
there.
little
Yeah.
arrows.
Yeah. On our slide, it's missing for some reason. But it just shows the general planning process and where assessment fits in. So assessment is part of the planning process, and it includes also curriculum review, program review, annual plan, and then the 3 levels of assessment, SLOs, of course, at the classroom level, PLOs at the program level, and then ILOs, which was what we're here for today. And it's a cyclical process, and all of this planning process informs not only the other planning processes within that group there, but also more general institutional things like mission statement and other things on the campus level.
Jenny, is program review including CT review as well?
Yes, yes. That is done every 2 years. Yes, if you're a CTE program. Next slide is showing the previous ILO assessments. I don't know if you remember, some of you are new to the campus, but I started being SLO coordinator in 2006, and I was coordinator until 2011, and when I became curriculum chair after that. So since from 2011 till this year, I had a little hiatus from coordinating, but way at the beginning of the process in 2006, and if you do the math, it's been about 10 years, well, 9 years, 10 years. We had 6 ILOs to begin with. It was a big process. The ALC, the committee, the Assessment of Learning Committee went through a big process and narrowed down what were called core competencies then, but are called ILOs now, to 6. And you can see those on the 3rd slide there. So there's content knowledge, communication, and comprehension, which was simplified now to communication. Critical, creative, and analytical thinking. It used to be that, now it's just critical thinking, and that's what we're focusing on now. Professional, personal growth, community, and collaboration were collapsed into 1 ILO later on, and then information and technology literacy. So you can see the different dates. So from fall 2010 to spring 2014, all 6 ILOs were assessed. So that was sort of the first ILO assessment cycle. And as a result, so go to the next slide, the 6 ILOs were narrowed down to 4. So that was one of the outcomes of all 6 assessments. So now we have critical thinking, of course, communication, which was assessed last year, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about the results from that. Community and personal development is the 3rd, and then information literacy is our 4th ILO. Going to the next slide. Yes.
Let me just say, I'm in the Math and Science building over on the Compton Center, and I cannot get access to open up my email to open up the document. So I'm just going to listen very intently. I can't open up the document.
That sounds, I'll try to be descriptive as possible. Okay, so on to the next slide. So one of the previous critical thinking assessment, so when we had 6 core competencies, or as they are called now, ILOs, what we did for the first critical thinking assessment is we had faculty generally rate their students on their overall performance. So we didn't have faculty choose an assessment from their class, but rather just generally how did the students do in 6 different areas. Draw a conclusion based on evidence or information, evaluate quality and credibility of the source or evidence, create a work that meets defined standards, use standards to make judgments, apply theory to analyze data or solve a problem, and then the 6th one was create a solution or approach to the problem. So the ALC, the committee, the Assessment of Learning Committee, sat around and came up with these 6 different areas based on our statement, our previous ILO statement. Next slide. So as you can see from this assessment took place in spring 2011. Faculty from 13 sections returned student surveys. And that was one of the problems that made a lot of the ALC members and others a little uncomfortable was the small size of the sample. So we want to kind of increase sample size. And based on participation, actually, both in this phone call and at the ALC meeting yesterday, we should have much more participation this time around. So those from 13 sections, 8 faculty, that was 8 faculty from 13 sections. That's pretty small. Completed an assessment of their students' critical thinking skills. Again, this is overall. And then in addition to faculty ratings of their students, 313 students submitted self-assessments, sort of as a comparison. And as a result, this is the next slide. You can kind of look at the results. The left-hand side has the student self-assessment, and then the other side has the faculty assessment. So generally speaking, you can see that the students rated themselves higher than the faculty rated those students. The highest one for the students was create a work that meets defined standards, and this was one of the highest too for faculty, although the mean scores were much different. And then the lowest was for the students was apply theory, and for faculty, draw a conclusion based on evidence. One of the problems here also was it was kind of difficult to create actions based on what we saw here. Going to the next slide. So the critical, creative, and analytical thinking ILO was one of the ILOs assessed, but after this entire assessment cycle of all 6 ILOs, the ALC concluded that the current method of assessment was not the most effective method for gathering authentic data that relates to student learning and how faculty can improve it. So one of the things that you're going to see hopefully improved this time around is the authenticity of the assessment. Next slide. And then also just talking about last semester. So I'm just giving a little background both on the previous critical thinking one and then the ILO that took place, the assessment that took place last semester. The 3 actions that the ALC came up with was to increase sample size for ILO assessments. So to repeat again that people are uncomfortable with these small sample sizes. And just as an aside for the communication assessment, we proposed a writing across the curriculum program, and I believe the funding is tentatively going to come through for that, and then increase use of librarian and communication related courses, which was included in the writing across the curriculum proposal. To kind of give you an idea of the results of the assessment last year. So we're a little better this time around at coming up with actions. The previous batch of the 6 assessments that first time around, there wasn't a lot of actions proposed. So we want to change that as well. Okay, so which brings us to critical thinking. So on to the next slide. So being the critical thinker that I am, when I prepared for this presentation and thought about critical thinking, what was the first thing I did? I did a Google search, which kind of drives us crazy when our students do it, but it is a starting place. And I came up with a few definitions of critical thinking just to get us thinking about critical thinking. The first one here is from the Foundation for Critical Thinking, or it also calls itself the National Council for Excellence in Critical Thinking. So it says, critical thinking is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. So it's a very process-based type of thinking. Okay, next slide. This is according to the Association of American Colleges and Universities. Critical thinking is a habit of mind. I like that idea of habit of mind. That's what we're trying to instill in our students, the habit of critical thinking. It's a habit of mind characterized by the comprehensive exploration of issues, artifacts, and events before accepting or formulating an opinion or conclusion. A little more simple definition, hitting a lot of those same points. And then also the next slide, I found an article from the Wall Street Journal about how, on the bottom there, it's called Bosses Seek Critical Thinking, but what is that? And they asked a few sort of experts of critical thinking. So Richard Arum, the ability to cross-examine evidence and logical argument to sift through all the noise. I really like that definition because I think our students do, there is a lot of noise out there, and teaching our students to sift through that is a very important part of critical thinking. The next definition, thinking about your thinking while you're thinking in order to improve your thinking. It's very meta, I thought. And then the last one, do they make use of information that's available in their journey to arrive at a conclusion or decision? How do they make use of that? So again, this idea of using information to draw a conclusion or make a decision is an important part of critical thinking. Okay, next slide. And then, of course, El Camino College, ILO, first ILO critical thinking. Students apply critical, creative, and analytical skills to identify and solve problems, analyze information, synthesize and evaluate ideas, and transform existing ideas into new forms. So some examples, identify vital questions, problems, or issues, and evaluate solutions. Analyze, compose, and assess the validity of an argument. Compute and analyze multiple representations of quantitative information, including graphical, formulaic, numerical, verbal, and visual. So we're trying to kind of, this is a very, it's supposed to be sort of an umbrella statement to hit on a lot of disciplines. And hopefully you have found something in there that relates to your discipline. Okay, which brings us to, I'd like to hear from you guys. So we have 8 of us. 2 of us sitting here, and you know, just to make it simple and so people don't have to talk over others, I'll just call on you. And if you could say, give an example of an assignment that you use that involves critical thinking, or give your own thinking or definition of critical thinking, that would be great. So why don't we start with Satish?
Yeah, generally what I've seen is that students get bogged down into trivial, the noise-like issues, and miss the critical information that's being passed.
Yeah.
So I've seen that. So that's one of the problems we face in computer science classes very often.
Sifting through the noise.
Yeah, I'll give a very simple example. In a computer program, we have names, like students can choose any name for the program variables. And then we have some critical concepts, like expressions and things like that.
Yes.
And I've seen a whole semester, one student is still totally confused. Every time he'll ask me about some name I choose, and he'll say, why did we choose this name? I said, you can choose any name you want. So he's always there are students who are always hung up on this noise issues, actually.
Yeah, just distracted by extraneous things.
So either that's the habit of mind or something else.
Yeah.
That's something we need to think about in critical thinking.
Yeah. Okay. Asma?
Yeah, okay. Just my opinion about this, my definition is the ability of the students actually to solve problems and analyze situations and try to draw some conclusions from kind of hands-on activities. I'm going to give you an example from my, let's say, the first introductory course in physics. When I teach mirrors, okay, and like how images are forming and like all that stuff related to, one of the questions that I will ask my students, how many images they're going to form when you use like two mirrors at different angles. And then I will not give them right away the formula. I will start by just giving them two mirrors, and then I will ask them, okay, now working groups, show me, try to draw some kind of conclusions, how many images when the angle is 90, how many images when it is 60, like kind of, working together and try to find out what is going to be like the situation. And then after that, after they end up with writing just a very short conclusion, okay, I will go over it on the board. I will try to explain to them and say, oh, this is right, this is not, this is and finally this is the formula. Okay, and I will not give them the ready formula because I want them to actually to analyze the data that they collect from this like very simple activity. Is not going to take more than maybe 3 to 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, after that, we can draw conclusions. Let's say there is a connection between the angle and, like, kind of giving me any kind of conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. I'm done.
Okay. Leah?
Okay. Well, the way that I think about critical thinking is similar to what was previously mentioned and the definitions on the slides, which is collecting, evaluating, synthesizing varying points of view or sources, and then coming to some kind of conclusion. In regards to the course I teach, English 1C, which is critical thinking and composition, that particular conclusion is identifying a problem and solving it. Mm-hmm. And the culminating assignment that they are working on at the end of the semester is to identify a problem on campus and provide a solution for it. And I think that in that task, they have to collect sources, evaluate those sources, synthesize the sources, and then make a decision on what is the best, the most feasible solution for the problem. And then they're comparing how other schools have solved the problem or attempted to solve it. And then finally, connecting it to a larger issue. I think critical thinking goes beyond just the task at hand, but seeing how it connects to the world beyond the academic world and how it applies in real life, and students being able to make that connection is kind of the end game for me in critical thinking, is where does this go beyond the classroom? And this solving a problem obviously is something that we students need to be able to do to survive in the real world. And you can start here with an assignment doing so on campus, solving a problem on campus.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
okay.
And same thing, very similar to what Rhea and Kevin have just said. I happen to pose a problem for them, and they have to conduct academic research, locate sources, evaluate the sources, figure out the argument that they're making and the logic, and
for a research
their
paper?
argument for a research essay, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Connecting their kind of thesis to the larger world, and and like I said, a big part of research is evaluating sources and looking effective evidence and appropriate perspectives into their essay. So,
yeah,
very much critical thinking, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think it's interesting to hear from different disciplines about critical thinking and how similar and different, critical thinking is across disciplines. But it actually blows me away how very similar it is across disciplines. Okay, next slide. After the questions to ponder slide, so Stephanie and Kevin, who just joined us, we're looking at the PowerPoint slides.
Okay.
So if you could just get that up on a computer, if you have.
Yep, we got it.
We are.
Okay, so the questions to ponder with the little guy in the blue question mark. It's the slide we're on now. So next slide is, what is the plan? So the plan is hopefully, well, not hopefully, but it is going to be implemented next semester. And so around the 10th week, we want faculty, you all, to pull student assessments involving critical thinking from one of their sections, from one of your sections. So if you teach, 3, 4, 5 sections, you can just choose one. Although we will have to get back to you on the specifics of how to choose a section or whether or how much say you have in your choice of sections. The IR rep seemed to indicate that maybe it needed to be a little more random than just people choose. So we'll get back to you about that. Kevin, did you have something?
I did have a question. What about if the assessment that we would be using for this, we wouldn't get the final version of it until week 12, or afterwards?
Is there something? Yeah. I mean, the timing is also a question that I had for you guys. How feasible is this? Is there something you could use around the 10th week? That's maybe not the capstone, but kind of post.
I mean, yeah, there are elements of critical thinking in a lot of the assignments that we have, but I think if we're going to, week 10 does seem a bit early.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're meant to be measuring outcomes, I would assume we would do some, look in things that are assignments that we get between weeks 12 and 16.
Yeah, the schedule we currently have has us having a, quote, assessment lunch on April 8th. I mean, we could talk about making that a little bit later. Karen, what are your thoughts?
I don't see any problem with making it later, except that some people may have already scheduled it in.
Right. Exactly.
We brought it up early on.
We could have 2 separate times, too. I don't know how feasible that is.
Yeah, we could do that as well.
Yeah.
That might be a good idea.
Have the people that definitely have April 8th in red on their calendars. They're going to be there. They have something in mind. And then the ones that want a little more time in the semester to pull something from later on can maybe do something later.
Yeah. So conceivably then, everyone, you can pull an assignment from an 8-week class because a lot of the classes are 8 weeks.
Oh, sure. In nursing, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah, actually that's kind of ideal because you have an 8-week class that ends at week 8, and then you can just pull the final final assessment from that. Yeah, so the idea then is to pull assessments and rate them using a rubric. And we started to work on the rubric, and we got a little bit of feedback from the meeting yesterday. Although, let me... So we'll look at the rubric in a few minutes, but let's go to the next slide, which is me trying to sell this assessment. So as advantages from the previous assessment, so as you might recall, I talked about the previous critical thinking assessment, where we had faculty just rate their students on their overall performance in critical thinking rather than pull an actual assessment. And so the first advantage, I think, here is that it's more authentic, that we're actually looking at real assessments that students actually do in real courses. So I think that authenticity factor is a big advantage over the last assessment. I think you guys being involved from earlier in the process rather than getting an email all of a sudden in the middle of the semester saying, here, can you do this? Turn it in 3 weeks. And you're able to have some input also into the process, which I think increases buy-in. And so the sample size can increase. I think using a rubric rather than a simple rating scale from 1 to 5, without, that's the only information we gave the faculty, just rate your students from 1 to 5. It didn't actually break down into a rubric what the scale meant. And then I think the assessment lunch is a really important part of the process, actually bringing people together to dialogue about the assessment and what they do in their class, rather than sort of an after the fact, oh, here's what we found, here's the data we collected, here's some actions that we planned, and kind of getting faculty input sort of after the fact, rather than during the process, I think is a big advantage as well. Okay, next slide. We're going to skip the next slide because we already talked about it. So at this point, let's bring up the rubric. So if you could, the rubric is the one titled New Version. There are two rubrics that I sent. The one Critical and Creative Thinking rubric, New Version, is the one I want to look at. That's the one we're working on. The other rubric is the rubric from Palomar College, kind of verbatim, and that's what this rubric is based on. So if you wanted to go back and look at that rubric. And
okay, Jenny, there are two documents here, 1 and 2. The Word document?
Yeah.
The one?
Yeah.
The one that has
number 1.
ILO number 1 critical thinking, it says El Camino College on it. It has a scale of 3, developing, proficient, exemplary.
I have the one from scale of 1 to 4.
Okay, so it's the other one.
Okay, it's not that one. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry for the confusion. I actually realized after the fact that I probably confused more than clarified by sending 2 rubrics. Okay, so the one that has the scale of 3. So some of the feedback that we got yesterday, just so we're not repeating ourselves, is the people that came to the meeting yesterday want a 0 on the rubric itself, rather than in a note about using this rubric. So right above the rubric it says, evaluators are encouraged to assign a 0 to any work sample that does not meet the developing level, rather than having that little note actually having a column of 0. So that, because the point was, if you're not given a choice on the actual instrument, then people will tend to use 1 rather than 0 if it really doesn't meet the developing standard.
So are we meant to see the 1 of developing that is a passing score?
That is not a passing score, I don't think.
Okay.
I think proficient and exemplary are the cut score is 2.
Okay.
Minimally a 2, and 1 is not quite there yet. They're developing, but they're not there yet.
Okay. I think people liked the simplicity of it. I mean, that there were only 3
or actually 4 with the 0 categories rather than 4 or 5 categories.
I do like that.
Yeah, because I don't think we get more actions from more categories. I think it may confuse rather than clarify. There were some wording issues that people brought up, but I actually wanted to get your input as well.
Yeah, Jenny, I think this is very good. I judge robotics competition. We have exact same rubric there also. In fact, same words and everything.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that someone brought up yesterday was maybe we need another category, another trait. Identify, analyze, conclude is maybe not enough.
Well, you get the synthesize.
Yeah. Because I did collapse from the previous rubric. I did collapse the 2 categories, analyze and synthesize. Is that necessary?
I don't think so.
No.
I think it's just to create another category, just to have another category doesn't really
Right.
justify why we would need a 4th category. I think if you synthesize them both under analyze, do we need? I mean,
Maybe
does
it's
there have
enough.
to be 4
Yeah.
categories?
Yeah, sort of
Does there have to be 4?
the 3-step process: identify, analyze, conclude.
What was the reason?
Yeah.
Why for?
She was also an English instructor and felt that students needed synthesize was brought up as bringing that category back, as she felt that analyze wasn't enough, that she actually asked her students to also synthesize information, and felt this was a very important part of critical thinking.
Yeah, I would recommend synthesis, even if it's to be put in synthesis and conclude. But that would be fine too.
To include synthesis in conclusions. In conclusion.
Yeah, synthesize and conclude. We could do together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that actually makes sense.
I think that would be fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any other feedback? I mean, you could also just send it to me after. It's hard to talk on the phone about this, too, and think through the rubric and be on the phone. Okay, so I think that pretty much concludes our session. If there's any other questions or feedback, we will be in touch about, so we'll take your feedback about the early date and maybe make another date later on in the
That would be
semester.
excellent. That would be very good. The key measurement for my classes would be much later in the semester.
Much meaning
Week 16.
Yep.
week 15. Yeah, I mean, it is problematic to have something in the final week. Although maybe,
I mean, but if you're looking for reliable data
right.
that assesses an outcome, for me, it happens at the end of the semester.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with
I mean, otherwise, week 10 is really only a couple weeks past the midpoint
Midterm,
of the semester.
yeah.
We
And a
don't
lot of
need to
people,
make that
I could think of things that I do in my class that around the 9th or 10th week that could be used for this. But I know that's not the case with everybody. Okay, we can
Instrument, ILO instrument, would it be different for all classes or?
Right, a few, but if this is developed.
Okay, well, we can get back to you about that issue. And then about which section to choose. I think we have to talk to IR about their feelings about whether faculty choose the section or it's randomly chosen for the faculty member. So we'll see what they say.
Denny, I think Satish had a question about us all using different mechanisms for the assessments.
Uh-huh.
And that is generally the plan, right? So different assessments, but using the same rubric.
It has to be,
great.
yeah. It'll be interesting. I think the dialogue will be really interesting. The cross-disciplinary.
And then now it's like, the 10th week is like our week to start assessing, or like it's going to change. What do you think?
I didn't understand that.
Yeah, do you remember we have a discussion about like the assessment should be conducted at the 10th week.
Yeah, by.
For me, I can do these. I can do this like anytime, or
Okay.
it's gonna change.
Can you do this anytime, or is it going to change? You mean? Well, I think we're going to definitely leave that April 8th date. I mean, that can you can depend on that. But I think many instructors feel that something later on, so we may add a date as well. I think that'll be the strategy.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.